Good afternoon, guys. My name's Peter Cranston, and I'm going to take you through a fuel tank repair on my Ducati 695 Monster. The problem on the Ducati was going out to the shed. I noticed that the smell of petrol was getting stronger and stronger, and on examination I could see it was leaking from the flange on the fuel pump and a location pretty close to the cylinder head and the exhaust. The cause of it, when I did a little bit of research, was the ethanol in modern petrol reacts with the nylon tank and it causes distortion. It can cause the whole tank to distort, or it can cause the flange to distort. Did a little bit more research and spoke to a few people and find out it's a common plastic tank issue, not just for Ducatis, but for a number of other bikes as well. I then went onto the Ducati forums to look for various fixes. Some people had used various sealants, but for me sealants are a bit messy and I wouldn't be that comfortable using a sealant above a hot exhaust. I also found one chap who'd been quite innovative and he'd heated the tank up with a hot air gun till it became soft and pulled the flange back into place. Thought that was good, however I thought the problem might reappear later. I was looking for a more permanent fix. I was looking for a permanent flange repair solution. I've got a background in offshore engineering and we repair quite a lot of vessels, big pressure vessels offshore using a similar technique. And this technique that I'm going to use, it's dimensionally stable. The flange isn't going to move once we've done it. There's no messy sealant, making it difficult to remove the fuel pump. And in future, when you want to remove the fuel pump, you just drop the screws out and remove the pump. So the repair method I'm going to describe, the first thing you need to do is measure the existing flange. And we'll show you how to do that a little later on. You also need to ensure you've got at least 6mm clearance from the fittings and the hoses etc. on the bottom of the fuel tank with other parts of your bike, because the flange we're going to use is 6mm thick. You're then going to get a flange machined up, and I'm suggesting it might be more cost effective if a bunch of you get together, say 20 of you, get 20 flanges CNC machined, and the cost will come right down. You need to clean the tank because we're going to be proofing it. Once we've done that, we're going to drill and dry flit the flange. Then after that, we're going to abrade and clean the flange face. Absolute cleanliness is essential when you're using epoxies. Then we apply some JB Weld, and that's the stuff I use, but there's probably other suitable adhesives out there. We then insert 6 off countersunk screws, and that's what's going to hold the flange, the new metal flange, onto the distorted plastic flange on the tank. We then remove excess JB Weld, and again we clean the tank internals again. Then we ethanol proof the tank using one of the proprietary tank sealants. The one I used was actually Caswell, but there may be others out there as well. Then on the flange face, we clean off any residual tank sealant, and that can simply be done by coarse emery or coarse wet and dry. And the final thing we want to do is then refit the fuel pump and pressure test before putting back on the bike. The materials that you'll need a machined flange as per the sketch, which you'll see later. You need some steel loaded epoxy such as JB Weld. You need some fasteners, and what I used was 6 off M4 countersunk hex Allen screws in stainless 35mm long, nylon lucks, nylon nuts and flat washers, and I actually got the longer M4 countersunk screws so I could cut them down to size. And because you're putting a flange on, your existing M6 dome head screws won't be long enough, so I got longer ones at 25mm. All these things are easily available on eBay. For cleaning my nylon tank, I went with acetone. Just got a little 100ml container of acetone. And the final thing you need is a new fuel pump gasket. Total cost for me for all these bits and pieces, including the flange machining, was about £110. A lot less than a new Ducati fuel tank. So, the first step you want to do is measure the existing flange. So measure the outside diameter, measure the inside diameter, and then measure the diameter that the holes are on. It's also known as the PCD or pitch cord diameter. And the easy way to do that is to put in a couple of screws opposite each other, measure between the outside of those screws and subtract the diameter of the screw. But being a Ducati, it's probably common that this fuel pump is on a large number of Ducatis. And this is what you're going to get machined up. So you can see you've got 6 off M7 holes, equispaced on a 130mm PCD. And then you've also got 6 off M4 clearance countersunk holes, again equispaced on a 130mm PCD. And any competent machine shop will be able to produce this very easily. The important thing is that the outer face that the fuel pump gasket or the fuel pump O-ring is going to sit on is smooth and clean. And how I prepped mine was I got a bit of plate glass and some emery paper and just smoothed it off on that till it came up nice and smooth. You're now going to dry fit the flange. So you can see the flange there, and bolt it onto the tank using your existing screws. Then what you're going to do is in the countersink holes that you can see there is drill M4 holes, and you're then going to use the M4 countersunks to hold that flange into position. And I suggest you dry fit it, put all the screws in and make sure they fit, and then measure on the inside of the tank how much they're protruding through, because you only really want about 7 or 8mm protruding through for your washer and your nut, and then cut them down to size. When you take the flange off, again, clean the flange faces with acetone. Cleanliness is everything here. Now you're moving on to fit the flange. So mix up your JB weld, spread it on the flange face, and fill the new M4 holes both on your steel flange and on the existing plastic tank flange. Fit the flange and insert the M4 screws, nuts and washers. And when you're putting the washers on the inside, put a big dot of JB weld on the end of that screw, because when you tighten that washer up, it'll squeeze the JB weld into the hole and seal it up. Then progressively tighten up the M4 screws. Not too tight, just enough to take the distortion out of the flange, and that will also squeeze the JB weld into all the cavities. And also on the countersunk area of the screws, before you put them in, make sure you've got JB weld in them as well. So you're effectively sealing that hole in 3 places: on the washers, on the flange face between the metal flange and the plastic flange, and also on the countersunk of the M4 screws. Then clean off the excess JB weld. And the final thing you want to do, because some of this JB weld will have gone into the M6 tank screws, with one of your old M6 screws, cut a slot down the side of it and use that to clean out the JB weld. And you can do that while the JB weld's wet, and I also suggest you do it after maybe 5 or 6 hours when the JB weld is just partially set. That keeps it nice and clean. Moving on now to ethanol proofing the tank. because you want to prevent the situation getting any worse. So what I did was I made a tank sealing flange from ply. I then cleaned the tank using dishwasher tablet dissolved in about a gallon or a gallon and a half of hot water. And I swirled that about, got the tank nice and clean, and rinsed it out with fresh water. You then want to block the filler hole in the tank with a big rubber bung and protect your valuable tank with cling film. Probably want to have about 4 or 5 layers on it to protect it. Next, dry the tank fully with a hot air gun, and I put it on the medium setting, not on the really hot, because that could damage the tank. And I did that for some time and turned the tank into different orientations, because with the Ducati tank there's lots of little pockets where water can sit. Once your tank's nice and dry, get your workshop up to the correct temperature and mix and apply the ethanol proofer as per instructions. The one I used was Caswell. And when you apply the ethanol proofer, pour it in through the flange hole, then put your ply flange on, and then seal round the edge. Seal it up with some duct tape so it can't come out. And then rotate it round in all different directions for the appropriate period of time. When you let it settle, once you drain it out, let it settle in the position that the tank will sit on the bike. This allows any of the tank sealing resin to settle round the top of the flange face and again provide an extra barrier of sealing. Final fitting. Once you've done that, strip everything off, clean any excess sealant from the flange face. I just did that with a scraper and then cleaned it all off with some typically P80 or P120 emery. I actually pressure tested my tank with a couple of PSI just to be sure, but the other way to do it is fill it up with petrol and let it sit overnight and see how it goes. Next, refit it to your Ducati, and finally, go and enjoy. Thank you very much.